My name is Alexander, 67 years old, and I built my life developing luxury properties across California. My daughter Julia was always my pride and joy, especially after losing her mother. When Julia got married, I gifted her a $3 million villa in Malibu as a wedding present. I never imagined her husband James would move his entire family in, turning my beloved daughter into their personal maid. The day I reclaimed that house with just one sentence, the look on his face was priceless. Before I tell you what happened, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you value protecting your loved ones from those who would take advantage of them. I was born in a small town in Idaho, the son of a carpenter who taught me everything about construction from the ground up. By 16, I was working summers learning the trade, and by 25, I had started my own small construction business. Those early years were tough, full of 16-hour workdays and tight margins, but I had determination. I remember sleeping in half-finished houses during projects to save money and maximize work hours. Those humble beginnings shaped my appreciation for homes as more than structures. They're sanctuaries, places where families build their lives. By my 30s, I had expanded into real estate development, specializing in high-end properties along the California coast. Success came gradually but steadily, and I built a reputation for quality craftsmanship and attention to detail. My developments weren't just houses. They were carefully designed homes with character, each one unique and personal. During this journey, I met my wife Margaret at a community fundraiser where I was donating construction services for a new shelter. She was volunteering there, serving food to the homeless with such grace and kindness that I couldn't take my eyes off her. Margaret was a kindergarten teacher with a heart bigger than all of California. We married within a year, and our daughter Julia came along 2 years later. Margaret instilled values of compassion and service in Julia from an early age. Our home was always filled with love, laughter, and the occasional chaos of 20 kindergartners coming over for special weekend activities Margaret organized. Those were the happiest years of my life, watching my daughter grow under the guidance of her wonderful mother. When Julia was 22 and in her final year of college, Margaret was diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer. The next 3 years were a brutal battle of treatments, hope, disappointment, and finally acceptance. Through it all, Julia showed incredible strength, often putting her mother's needs before her own educational pursuits. She still graduated with her teaching degree, making Margaret immensely proud just 4 months before we lost her. The 5 years since Margaret's passing have been a journey of grief and healing for both Julia and me. We became even closer, having Sunday dinners without fail, calling each other daily, and supporting one another through the difficult milestones, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. Each one was painful without Margaret, but we found new traditions that honored her memory while allowing us to move forward. Julia followed in her mother's footsteps, becoming an elementary school teacher at a public school in a challenging neighborhood. Her dedication to those children, many from underprivileged backgrounds, reminded me so much of Margaret that sometimes it took my breath away. Julia had her mother's patience, kindness, and that special ability to see the potential in everyone. When Julia told me she had met someone, I was cautiously optimistic. At 30, she hadn't dated extensively, focusing instead on establishing her career and processing her grief. She deserved happiness and love in her life. That's how James entered our story. They met at a charity auction for Julia's school. James had attended representing his financial firm, which was looking for community outreach opportunities. According to Julia, he had bid generously on several items supporting the school's art program, which immediately earned her attention and appreciation. James was 34, tall with perfectly groomed dark hair and an expensive suit that he wore, with the confidence of someone accustomed to success. When Julia introduced us at dinner the following week, he was charm personified, firm handshake, direct eye contact, thoughtful questions about my business, and genuine seeming interest in my responses. He even brought a bottle of single malt scotch that showed either good research or lucky guessing about my preferences. As a father, especially one who had already seen his daughter through so much pain, I found myself analyzing James perhaps more critically than other fathers might. There was something about his polished exterior that made me wonder what lay beneath. Still, Julia was happier than I had seen her in years. She practically glowed when looking at him, laughing more frequently, and talking excitedly about their shared future plans. Their courtship moved quickly. Within 3 months, they were discussing moving in together. By 6 months, James was asking my permission to propose. That conversation in my home office remains vivid in my memory. "Sir, I want you to know that I love Julia with all my heart," he said, sitting across from me with perfect posture. "She's the most genuine, caring person I've ever met, and I want to spend my life making her happy." "That's quite a fast timeline, James," I replied, watching his reaction carefully. "You've known each other less than a year. When you know, you know," he answered smoothly, not a hint of doubt crossing his features. "Life is too short to wait when you've found the right person." Something in his practiced response didn't sit quite right with me. But what evidence did I have beyond a father's natural protectiveness? Julia was an adult capable of making her own decisions, and she was undeniably happy. "What about children? Family? Have you discussed those things?" I asked. "We both want children," he nodded, "and family is important to both of us. I come from a close-knit family myself." When I gave my blessing, with the caveat that they consider a slightly longer engagement, the look of triumph that briefly flashed across James's face gave me pause. It was gone so quickly I wondered if I had imagined it. Julia's excitement at the engagement overshadowed any lingering doubts I harbored. She immediately dove into wedding planning, calling Margaret's sisters and old friends, gathering ideas, and creating elaborate Pinterest boards. Seeing her so animated, so full of purpose and joy, I pushed aside my reservations. After all, this was Julia's life, Julia's choice, and I had decided on the perfect wedding gift. The villa I chose for Julia and James was one of my most cherished properties. Situated in an exclusive enclave of Malibu, it offered breathtaking ocean views from a cliffside vantage point that made each sunset a spectacular event. The 5-bedroom, 6-bathroom Mediterranean-style home featured hand-carved wooden beams, imported marble flooring, and floor-to-ceiling windows that invited the Pacific's beauty inside. At 7,000 square feet, the home was perhaps larger than a newly married couple needed, but I envisioned grandchildren playing in the expansive garden someday, family gatherings on the terrace, and enough space for Julia to perhaps set up a small learning center for underprivileged children if she wished. The property included a detached guest house where I could stay when visiting without intruding on their privacy. I had originally built this villa 7 years prior for a Hollywood director who fell in love with the design but ultimately relocated to New York before taking possession. Rather than putting it on the market, I had kept it as a corporate retreat, making it available to select clients, and occasionally using it myself when I needed peaceful surroundings to develop new project concepts. 3 months before the wedding, I assembled a team of interior designers, landscapers, and craftsmen to refresh the property. The kitchen was upgraded with top-of-the-line appliances that I knew Julia would appreciate, as cooking had become her form of therapy after Margaret passed. The master bathroom was transformed into a spa-like retreat with a soaking tub positioned to capture ocean views. I had the gardens redesigned with varieties of Margaret's favorite flowers, creating a living memorial that would surround Julia with her mother's presence on her special day. Most meaningful to me was the custom reading nook I had built in the East Wing. Modeled after the corner of our home where Margaret had read to Julia every night, it featured built-in bookshelves, a cushioned window seat, and subtle lighting. I even managed to track down copies of all the children's books Margaret had loved reading to our daughter. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather, as if Margaret had arranged it herself. After walking Julia down the aisle in the church where we had christened her, and where we had said goodbye to Margaret, I found myself studying James during the vows. His words were perfect, his timing impeccable, yet something in his delivery struck me as performative. Once again, I silently scolded myself for looking for flaws in the man my daughter had chosen. At the reception, after dinner, and the traditional dances, I clinked my glass for attention. The crowd of 200 guests fell silent, and I felt a moment of stage fright as all eyes turned to me. "When Julia was little," I began, my voice thick with emotion, "she used to build elaborate houses with blocks and tell me all about the families who lived in them. The doctors and teachers and artists who shared meals around imaginary tables and watched sunsets from pretend porches." A gentle laugh rippled through the audience, and Julia nodded, remembering. Today, as Julia and James begin building their real life together, I wanted to give them not just a house, but a home worthy of the family they will become. I nodded to my assistant, who projected images of the villa onto the large screen behind me. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as each stunning view was revealed. Julia's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. James, beside her, straightened in his chair, a curious expression crossing his face before settling into a gracious smile. "The keys to your new home in Malibu," I said, crossing to them and placing a small decorative box in Julia's trembling hands. "May it be filled with as much love and laughter as you brought to mine." Julia leapt from her seat, tears streaming down her face, and threw her arms around me. "Daddy, it's too much," she whispered. "It's perfect. Mom would have loved it." "She helped me choose it," I replied softly, holding my daughter tightly. James stood more slowly, his expression calculating before warming into appreciation. When he embraced me, his words were perfectly appropriate. "This is extraordinarily generous, Alexander. We will treasure this gift." Yet something in his tone suggested an assessment of value rather than emotional gratitude. The newlyweds delayed their honeymoon to move into the villa immediately. I respected their privacy for the first 2 weeks, then accepted Julia's enthusiastic invitation for Sunday dinner at their new home. Arriving with groceries and wine, I found the house already transformed with their personal touches. Photos everywhere, fresh flowers in vases, and Julia's collection of handmade pottery displayed prominently in custom-built shelving. "Dad, what do you think?" Julia asked, twirling in the entrance hall. "James let me decorate however I wanted." I noted the phrasing with a twinge of concern. "Let her? In a house that was her wedding gift?" "It's beautiful, sweetheart," I replied sincerely. "You've made it your own already." James emerged from his home office, dressed casually but expensively in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater. "Alexander, welcome," he greeted me with a firm handshake. "Julia's been cooking all day. Wait until you taste her Ciopino." The dinner was delightful, with Julia animatedly describing their decorating adventures and plans for the garden. James was attentive, refilling wine glasses and complimenting the food, though I noticed he subtly directed the conversation whenever it veered toward financial matters or his work. When Julia mentioned potentially using part of the guest house as a weekend tutoring space for some of her struggling students, James smoothly redirected. "We should really discuss that more before making plans, honey," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We want to establish ourselves first before opening our home to outsiders." The weekly dinners became a cherished routine. I watched as Julia settled into married life, her natural homemaking skills transforming the villa into a showcase worthy of architectural magazines. James seemed to be treating her well, bringing home flowers regularly and surprising her with weekend getaways to wine country. About 2 months into their marriage, I arrived for dinner to find unexpected additional guests. An older couple sat in the living room, the man with James's same sharp features, the woman with his exact calculated smile. "Dad, meet James's parents, Robert and Diane." Julia introduced them with a slightly strained smile. "They surprised us with a visit from Seattle." "Actually," James interjected smoothly, "they're considering relocating to the area. The weather in Seattle has been aggravating Dad's arthritis." Something about this information seemed to surprise Julia as much as it did me, but she recovered quickly, ever the gracious hostess. "Yes, we're showing them around the area this week." That dinner was noticeably different from our previous gatherings. Robert dominated the conversation with lengthy stories about James's childhood achievements, while Diane peppered Julia with questions about the cost of furnishings and maintenance of the property. Julia seemed unusually quiet, jumping up frequently to serve or clear dishes. James appeared perfectly comfortable with the dynamic, occasionally patting Julia's hand when she returned to her seat. As I left that evening, I overheard Robert commenting on the guest house. "That would be perfect for us, Jamie. Private but close enough. And with all this space in the main house, we wouldn't be in anyone's way." James's response was too low for me to hear, but the seed of what would become a significant problem had been planted. 3 weeks later, when I arrived for our Sunday dinner, I was surprised to find moving boxes stacked in the foyer. Julia emerged from the kitchen, looking slightly flustered. "Dad, sorry about the mess," she said, kissing my cheek. "Robert and Diane are moving into the guest house temporarily. Their rental application in Santa Monica fell through, and they need somewhere to stay while they continue house hunting." "Temporarily?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "How long is temporary?" "Just a few weeks," Julia assured me, though something in her eyes suggested uncertainty. "They're really determined to find their own place quickly." James appeared, clapping me on the shoulder with manufactured camaraderie. "Alexander! Perfect timing. Could you help me move some of these boxes to the guest house? Dad's back is acting up again, and Julia has her hands full with dinner." During our box-carrying task, James explained how his parents had faced unexpected financial difficulties after his father's early retirement from dental practice. "Dad invested heavily in a friend's business that went under," he confided. "They had to sell their Seattle home and downsize significantly. It's just until they get back on their feet." I nodded sympathetically but wondered why a successful financial advisor like James couldn't have guided his parents toward better investment choices or helped them financially without involving Julia and their new marriage. Over the next month, I noticed subtle changes in both the villa and my daughter. The immaculate organization she had established was giving way to clutter not of her making. Designer throw pillows were replaced with less expensive, less tasteful alternatives. The fresh flowers that had always been Julia's signature touch were absent. More concerning was Julia herself. Our phone calls became less frequent and shorter. Twice she canceled our Sunday dinner with last-minute excuses about migraines or exhaustion. When we did meet, dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her animated conversation had dimmed to polite small talk. 6 weeks after his parents' arrival, I stopped by unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon, knowing Julia would be home from school. I found her in the kitchen with a man I didn't recognize, who was eating a sandwich while she prepared what looked like enough food for a large gathering. "Dad!" Julia exclaimed, surprise and something like relief crossing her face. "I didn't know you were coming by." "Thought I'd surprise you," I said, eyeing the stranger who continued eating without acknowledging my presence. "Who's your friend?" "Oh, this is Patrick, James's brother," she explained hurriedly. "He's staying with us for a little while, too. Patrick, this is my father, Alexander." Patrick gave a cursory nod without standing or offering his hand. "The house gifter. Cool place you built." I raised an eyebrow at his tone but turned my attention back to Julia. "Everything okay, sweetheart? You seem tired." "Just busy," she replied with a forced smile. "Patrick's job hunting, and Robert and Diane need special meals for their health conditions, so I'm cooking separate dinners. And we're having James's work colleagues over tonight, so I'm prepping for that too." "Doesn't James help with all this?" I asked, gesturing to the extensive food preparation underway. Patrick snorted. "My brother? In the kitchen? That'll be the day." Julia shot him a warning look before answering me. "He's very busy with work. His firm is considering him for a promotion." I stayed for an hour, helping Julia chop vegetables and observing the strange new dynamic in her home. Patrick wandered in and out, asking Julia to make him another sandwich, requesting specific snacks, and leaving dishes in the sink. Twice, Diane called from the guest house with additional food requests. When I tried to discuss the situation with Julia, she became defensive. "It's just temporary, Dad. Family helps family. James would do the same for me." My concerns deepened the following Sunday when I arrived for dinner to find yet another new face. A woman in her early 30s was sprawled on the sofa watching television, 2 young children racing around the previously immaculate living room, toys scattered everywhere. "Dad, this is Melissa," James's sister, Julia, introduced us, her smile not reaching her exhausted eyes, and her children, Tyler and Emma. "They're visiting for a few weeks." Melissa barely looked up from her phone. "Julia, Tyler needs juice, not water. And Emma won't eat anything green, so make sure her plate doesn't have vegetables touching the other food." I watched in disbelief as my daughter hurried to accommodate these demands while the children continued turning the living room into a disaster zone. When I offered to help, Julia whispered, "Please don't make waves, Dad. James says family is everything, and we need to support his during their difficult time." That night's dinner was chaotic. Robert complained about the temperature of his food. Patrick talked with his mouth full while reaching across others for dishes. The children whined and spilled drinks. Diane criticized Julia's choice of table linens. Through it all, James sat at the head of the table looking completely satisfied with the arrangement. After dinner, while Julia was busy serving dessert, I cornered James in the hallway. "This seems like a lot for Julia to handle alone," I said carefully. "When are your family members planning to find their own places?" James's pleasant expression hardened momentarily before the smooth smile returned. "We're all family now, Alexander. Julia understands the importance of being there for each other. My parents raised me to believe that family always comes first." And what about Julia's needs? Her comfort in her own home? Julia is perfectly happy, he replied dismissively. She loves taking care of people. It's what she does best. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to take this call. He pulled out his phone and walked away, effectively ending the conversation. As the weeks turned into months, more disturbing patterns emerged. Julia stopped attending her book club and yoga classes, citing family responsibilities. Our one-on-one lunches were consistently canceled. When I called, the conversations were brief and often supervised, with James or another family member suddenly joining the call. Most alarming was Julia's physical transformation. She had lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her formerly athletic frame. Her bright smile appeared less frequently, and when it did, it seemed forced. The passionate, confident daughter I had raised was fading before my eyes, replaced by an anxious woman constantly trying to please everyone around her. During one of our rare private moments when I helped her carry groceries to the car after meeting briefly at the supermarket, I tried again to understand the situation. "Sweetheart, this living arrangement seems overwhelming. Is this really what you want?" Julia glanced around nervously before answering. "It's not forever, Dad. James says his promotion is coming soon, and then we'll have more resources to help everyone get established elsewhere. But it's been almost 6 months," I pointed out gently. "And your in-laws don't seem to be actively looking for their own place." "Their family," she repeated, as if reciting a mantra. "James says I need to understand that his family operates differently than ours did. They're more interdependent." That phrase, James says. I was hearing it more and more frequently, and it sent a chill through me each time. My daughter was disappearing behind her husband's dictates. The situation reached a breaking point when James's elderly aunt arrived with her 3 cats, allegedly for a short visit while her condo was being fumigated. The once beautiful villa now housed 9 adults, 2 children, and 3 animals, with Julia serving as maid, cook, and emotional support for them all. After not seeing Julia for nearly 3 weeks, despite multiple attempts, I decided an unannounced visit was necessary. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after the wedding, and I knew Julia would be home from school. What I didn't expect was the transformation of the property that greeted me. The meticulously landscaped front yard was now unkempt, with weeds sprouting between pavers and withered plants in containers. A collection of mismatched furniture cluttered the once elegant front porch, including a stained recliner and what appeared to be a makeshift clothesline strung between columns. I rang the doorbell, hearing chaotic noise inside. After several minutes, the door opened to reveal a teenage boy I had never seen before, eating chips from a bag and looking at me suspiciously. "Yeah?" he asked without introducing himself. "I'm here to see Julia," I explained, maintaining my composure. "I'm her father." The boy shrugged and walked away, leaving the door open. I stepped inside and felt my heart sink. The beautiful home I had gifted my daughter was unrecognizable. The once pristine marble floors were sticky with spills and tracked dirt. Moving boxes that should have been unpacked or discarded months ago lined the hallway. The designer furniture was now draped with blankets and surrounded by clutter. The air smelled of old food and cat litter. I made my way toward the kitchen, passing the living room where 3 unfamiliar men watched sports on the massive television, surrounded by beer cans and takeout containers. One nodded to me vaguely, the others didn't acknowledge my presence. In the kitchen I found Julia stirring something on the stove, while simultaneously trying to mop up a spill on the floor. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore stained sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. She looked like she had lost at least 20 pounds since I last saw her. "Julia," I said softly. She spun around, nearly dropping the wooden spoon. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Her voice held both surprise and what sounded alarmingly like fear. "I haven't been able to reach you," I explained, stepping forward to embrace her. She felt fragile in my arms. I was worried. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Things have been so busy. James's cousins are visiting from Chicago, and his uncle needed a place to stay after the divorce, and I've been trying to keep up with everything." As she spoke, a gray-haired woman entered the kitchen and interrupted without any greeting. "Julia, Tyler needs his uniform washed for tomorrow, and Robert wants to know when dinner will be ready. The pain medication makes him hungry earlier." She barely glanced at me before leaving. "Who was that?" I asked, bewildered by the stranger's commanding tone. "James's Aunt Meredith," Julia explained hurriedly. She's been helping coordinate everyone's schedules. Helping? It sounds like she's giving you orders in your own home. Julia glanced nervously toward the doorway. Please don't start anything, Dad. James gets upset when I can't keep everyone happy. As if summoned by his name, James appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from annoyance to forced pleasantry when he saw me. Alexander, what a surprise, he said smoothly, though his eyes were cold. We weren't expecting you. Clearly, I replied, struggling to maintain civility. I've been trying to reach Julia for weeks. We've been incredibly busy, James answered before Julia could speak. Julia's phone broke, and we haven't had time to replace it. Right, honey? Julia nodded, though something in her eyes contradicted the agreement. Why don't you join us for dinner? James continued. Julia's prepared enough for an army, as usual. Though with our full house, we actually need that much food. He laughed as if this were a charming situation rather than a concerning one. I accepted the invitation, determined to understand exactly what was happening in my daughter's life. The dining experience was worse than I could have imagined. 14 people crowded around and near the table meant for 8. Julia served everyone before taking a seat herself, only to be interrupted constantly for seconds, different drink requests, and complaints about the food temperature or seasoning. James presided at the head of the table like a king holding court, sharing inside jokes with his family members and occasionally directing condescending remarks toward Julia. My wife thinks salt is a proper seasoning, he commented when his brother complained about the bland pasta. The family laughed while Julia flushed with embarrassment. Throughout the meal, I observed the dynamics with growing horror. Julia was treated not as the lady of the house, but as the help. She wasn't included in conversations. Her attempts to share a story from her school day were talked over. No one offered to help clear plates or serve dessert. Most disturbing was Julia's behavior. She flinched when voices were raised. She apologized constantly. She ate quickly and minimally, as if expecting to be called away at any moment. This wasn't my confident, vibrant daughter. This was someone being systematically diminished. After dinner, while Julia was washing dishes alone despite the many able-bodied adults in the house, I managed to pull her aside. Can we talk privately? I asked quietly. She glanced toward the living room where James was holding forth about some work accomplishment. The garden, she whispered. 5 minutes. I made my way outside, noting the neglected state of what had once been a showpiece landscape. The fountain was dry, weeds choked the flower beds. Empty beer bottles dotted the once immaculate lawn. Julia joined me, wrapping her cardigan tightly around her thin frame. I only have a few minutes, she said anxiously. James will wonder where I am. Julia, I began, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. What's happening here? This isn't the life you wanted. Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I thought she would continue to defend the situation. Then something broke. Her shoulders slumped, and the tears spilled over. I don't know what happened, Dad, she whispered. It all changed, so fast. First, his parents needed a temporary place, and I wanted to make a good impression. Then Patrick lost his apartment, and I couldn't say no. Then everyone else started arriving, and before I knew it, why didn't you tell me how bad it was? She wiped at her tears. James changed after the wedding. He said a wife's role is to support her husband's family, that I was being selfish for wanting privacy or time alone. He said you raised me to be entitled and spoiled, that I needed to learn family values. My blood boiled at this manipulation, but I kept my expression calm. And the house? Your beautiful home? It's not mine anymore, she said, her voice breaking. Nothing is. James controls all our accounts now. He said combining finances was the mark of a trusting marriage, so I added him to everything. Then he removed my name from the accounts, saying he's better with money and I shouldn't worry about it. I get an allowance for groceries and household expenses, but it's never enough for all these people. What about your teaching salary? Direct deposited to our joint account, but I don't have access anymore. He said he's investing it for our future. Julia, this is financial abuse, I said as gently as possible. I know, she admitted in a whisper. But I'm trapped, Dad. If I confront him, he gets so angry. And where would I go? How would I support myself if he froze everything? You'd come home with me, I said firmly. Today. Right now. She shook her head frantically. I can't. He's threatened to ruin my reputation at school, to tell people I had a breakdown. He has friends on the school board. And he said. Her voice dropped even lower. He said he'd make sure I regretted embarrassing him. that accidents happen to people who cross him. The veiled threat against my daughter ignited a rage I carefully controlled. Now wasn't the time for an emotional confrontation, but for strategic thinking. "Julia," I said carefully, "I need you to trust me. I'm going to find a way to help you, but I need a little time to arrange things properly. Can you hold on a bit longer?" She nodded, wiping away tears. "I've been keeping a journal," she said. "Hidden in my classroom at school. It documents everything. The financial control, the verbal abuse, the isolation tactics, just in case something happens to me." The fact that my daughter feared for her safety enough to create such documentation broke my heart and strengthened my resolve. "James is coming," she whispered suddenly, straightening and wiping her face. "Please, don't let him know we talked like this." I nodded, turning to admire a nearby plant as if we'd been discussing gardening. As James approached with his trademark artificial smile, I made a silent promise to my daughter. This situation would end soon, and James would regret ever having taken advantage of my child. The morning after my disturbing dinner at Julia's house, I contacted Howard Friedman, my attorney of 30 years. We had weathered countless business deals together, but I had never seen him as angry as when I described Julia's situation. "This is elder abuse by proxy," Howard fumed, pacing his corner office with its sweeping views of downtown Los Angeles. "They're using your daughter to live off your generosity, while systematically isolating her from you." "Julia's 30, hardly an elder," I pointed out wearily. "No, but you're the elder they're targeting through her," he clarified, "taking advantage of your parental love and generosity. And what they're doing to Julia is straight out of the abuser's playbook. Financial control, isolation, undermining self-esteem, creating dependency. I need to get her out of there, Howard, and I want that house back. They don't deserve it." Howard stopped pacing and looked at me thoughtfully. "The deed. How exactly did you transfer the property?" This question triggered a memory. Because the villa was one of my most valuable properties, Howard had suggested certain conditions in the deed transfer to protect Julia's interests in case of divorce. At the time, I had worried such provisions might seem like I didn't trust my new son-in-law, but Howard had insisted. "We included a behavioral clause," I recalled slowly. "Something about maintaining the property according to specific standards and not using it for any purpose other than a private residence for Julia and James." Howard snapped his fingers and turned to his computer, typing rapidly. "Exactly, and there was language about your right to reclaim the property if certain conditions were violated." He pulled up the document and scrolled through it, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "Alexander, you're going to want to read this. Specifically, clauses 23 through 27. I leaned forward to read the sections he indicated. "The property is transferred with the express understanding that it will serve as the primary residence of Julia Eleanor Watson and her legal spouse only. Any additional permanent residence must be approved in writing by the original deed holder, Alexander Watson. The property shall be maintained to community standards and in a condition no less than that at the time of transfer. Failure to maintain the property appropriately shall constitute grounds for deed review. The original deed holder reserves the right to reclaim the property with 30 days' notice if any of the above conditions are materially breached, or if the property is being used in a manner inconsistent with its intended purpose as a property, private family residence. In the event of reclamation due to breach of conditions, reasonable allowance shall be made for the removal of personal property belonging to the deed recipients, but no financial compensation shall be required." I looked up at Howard, hope rising for the first time since I'd seen Julia's deteriorated condition. "This is our answer." "It's a start," Howard cautioned, "but we need evidence of the violations to make it stick if James decides to fight this legally. We need documentation of the property's current condition, proof of the unauthorized residence, and evidence of how Julia is being treated." Over the next week, we built our case methodically. I hired Daniel Reeves, a licensed private investigator and former police detective, to document the comings and goings at the villa. Within 3 days, he had photographic evidence of 12 different adults using keys to enter the property, parking records showing 8 vehicles regularly overnight on the premises, and time-lapse footage demonstrating the property's neglected condition. More damning was the audio he legally obtained from the exterior of the house during a particularly loud family gathering, capturing James and his relatives, making disparaging comments about Julia, and explicitly discussing their plans to continue living off the old man's generosity indefinitely. I met Julia for lunch near her school, carefully choosing a restaurant where James's acquaintances were unlikely to see us. She looked even thinner than before, but a spark of hope lit her eyes when I explained the deed provisions. "Can it really be that simple?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just take back the house, and they all have to leave?" "With the right legal approach, yes," I confirmed. "But Julia, taking back the house is only part of the solution. You need to leave James. What he's doing is abuse, plain and simple." She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. "I know. But he has all the financial control. My credit cards are maxed out with purchases his family made. My checking account is empty. I don't even have enough saved for a security deposit on an apartment." "You'll come home with me," I assured her. "We'll sort out the financial entanglements later. First priority is getting you to safety." "When?" she asked, a mixture of fear and hope in her voice. "This weekend. Saturday morning. James's entire family gathers for breakfast on Saturdays, correct?" When she nodded, I continued, "Perfect. Everyone will be present when we deliver the news. I want them all to hear it simultaneously." We formulated a careful exit plan. Julia would gradually, secretly move her most treasured possessions to her classroom over the next 3 days. On Friday, she would pack an overnight bag as if preparing for a school field trip, but actually bring it to my house. Saturday morning, she would return to the villa with me and Howard to confront James and his family. "What about divorce?" she asked, her voice stronger than I had heard it in months. "Howard is already preparing the paperwork. We'll file for emergency financial orders to freeze the accounts until everything can be properly divided." As our lunch concluded, Julia hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry, Dad. You gave us such a beautiful gift, and we ruined it." "You didn't ruin anything," I corrected her. "James and his family did, and now they'll face the consequences." Our final preparation involved a discreet meeting with Julia's principal, Dr. Martinez, a no-nonsense administrator who had always admired Julia's teaching skills. I explained the situation candidly, emphasizing the potential for James to try to undermine Julia professionally. Dr. Martinez's response was immediate and reassuring. "Your daughter is one of my most valued teachers, Mr. Watson. Her position is secure, and I'll personally ensure any attempts to damage her professional reputation are shut down immediately." With Julia's career protected, her essential possessions secured, and our legal strategy in place, we were ready for the confrontation that would free my daughter from her increasingly intolerable situation. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect Southern California day that belied the storm about to break at the Malibu villa. Julia had spent the night at my house, sleeping deeply for the first time in months, according to her own admission. Over breakfast, Howard reviewed our approach one final time. "Remember, stay calm regardless of how they react," he advised Julia. "Their anger and accusations will only strengthen our case if this eventually goes to court." "Will it?" she asked nervously. "I doubt it," Howard assured her. "The legal language is crystal clear and the documentation overwhelming. James strikes me as the type who will bluster and threaten but ultimately back down when confronted with irrefutable evidence." We arrived at the villa at precisely 10:30, knowing from Julia's intelligence that Saturday breakfast would be concluding. Howard parked his understated but expensive sedan behind my Range Rover in the circular driveway. Julia took a deep breath before using her key to open the front door of what had once been her dream home. The scene that greeted us was exactly as expected. The extended family had overtaken the once elegant dining room, with additional card tables set up to accommodate everyone. James sat at the head of the table, holding court like a feudal lord, while various family members lounged in states of post-meal satisfaction. Dirty dishes were stacked haphazardly, with no one making any effort to clear them. Conversation halted abruptly when we entered. James's expression cycled rapidly from surprise to irritation to a forced pleasantness. "Julia, Alexander," he said, rising from his chair. "We weren't expecting you. And you've brought a guest?" "This is Howard Friedman, my attorney," I stated clearly, watching James's facade crack slightly at the word attorney. "Attorney?" James repeated, his voice rising slightly. "What's this about?" "Perhaps we could speak in the living room," Howard suggested smoothly. "What we have to discuss concerns everyone present." James hesitated, then nodded curtly. Of course. Everyone, let's move to the living room. The family migrated to the large space, murmuring among themselves. I noticed Julia's tense posture and gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. She stood tall beside me, no longer the frightened woman I had seen just days before. Once everyone was seated or standing in various poses of defensive anticipation, Howard opened his leather portfolio and removed several documents. Mr. and Mrs. Carson, he began formally, addressing James and Julia and extended family members. I'm here representing Alexander Watson regarding the property at 7421 Ocean View Terrace, Malibu. Our home, James interjected with a tight smile. Alexander's generous wedding gift to us. That's precisely the matter at hand, Howard continued, unruffled. The deed transfer included specific conditions regarding occupancy and maintenance. James's father, Robert, pushed forward. What's this about, James? Is the old man trying to take back his gift because we moved in? The derogatory reference to me in the third person, as if I weren't standing right there, spoke volumes about the family's true feelings. Howard ignored the interruption and continued. Mr. Stay, Watson has documented significant violations of the deed provisions, specifically regarding unauthorized permanent residence, property maintenance standards, and use inconsistent with a private family residence. This is ridiculous, James scoffed, though I noticed beads of sweat forming on his forehead. You can't just take back a gift because you don't like how we're using it. Actually, he can, Howard replied, holding up the deed. Per Clause 25, which you signed and had notarized, Mr. Pence, Watson reserves the right to reclaim the property with 30 days' notice if certain conditions are materially breached. What conditions? James's mother demanded. We're family. Families live together. Howard turned to me, and I stepped forward, addressing my words directly to James. The property was deeded to you and Julia as your primary residence, not as a communal living facility for your extended family. Not as a flophouse for every relative needing a place to crash. It was meant to be a home where you and my daughter could build your life together. This is just a technicality, James argued, his confident mask slipping further. You're trying to control how we live our lives. No, I said firmly. I'm enforcing the legal agreement you signed, but more importantly, I'm protecting my daughter from what has become an abusive situation. James's face darkened. Abusive? Julia, tell your father how ridiculous that is. He looked at my daughter expectantly, clearly assuming she would back down as she had been conditioned to do. Instead, Julia straightened her shoulders and spoke clearly. It is abusive, James, financially, emotionally, and psychologically. You've isolated me, taken control of my money, turned me into an unpaid servant for your family, and threatened me when I objected. A chorus of protests erupted from James's family members, each one louder than the next, creating a cacophony of denial and counter-accusations. Howard let this continue for precisely 30 seconds before raising his hand for silence. Your objections are noted but irrelevant to the legal matter at hand, he stated when the noise had subsided. The deed provisions have been violated. Documentation has been submitted to the county recorder's office this morning, and this property now legally reverts to Alexander Watson, effective immediately. This is insane, James sputtered. You can't just kick us out of our home. That's where you're wrong, Howard replied, removing a final document from his portfolio. This isn't your home anymore. And while Mr. Watson is generously providing 30 days for most occupants to find new accommodations, there is an exception. He handed the document to James, whose hands shook as he read it. An emergency eviction order? On what grounds? Domestic abuse, Howard stated flatly. The court has granted an immediate eviction for you personally, James, based on evidence of financial and emotional abuse toward Julia. You have exactly 48 hours to remove your personal belongings from the premises. The silence that followed was profound. James's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally a calculating assessment as he looked at Julia. You planned this, he accused. You're trying to ruin me. Julia shook her head. No, James. You did this to yourself when you saw me as something to use rather than someone to love. My son has done nothing wrong, Robert bellowed, rising from his seat. This is about money, isn't it? The rich father can't stand that his precious daughter married into a family that needed help. This is about abuse, I corrected firmly, and about honoring agreements. The deed had conditions. You violated them, James made one last attempt to salvage the situation. With a smile that didn't reach his eyes, he approached Julia. "Honey, you're upset, I understand. Family dynamics can be complicated, but we can work this out between us, without lawyers and dramatic evictions." For a moment, I worried Julia might waver. Instead, she took a step back and spoke clearly. "I'm filing for divorce, James. It's over." The smile vanished from his face, replaced by cold fury. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you will." "That sounds remarkably like a threat," Howard observed mildly, making a note in his portfolio. "I wouldn't recommend adding intimidation to the court record." James fell silent, visibly calculating his options and apparently finding none favorable. Howard took control of the situation once more. "Here is the timeline. James Carson has 48 hours to remove his personal belongings. All other unauthorized residents have 30 days to find alternative accommodations. Mr. Watson will be changing the security system and installing monitoring cameras today. Any damage to the property during the transition period will result in additional legal action." "And where am I supposed to go?" James demanded. "That's not our concern," I replied. "You have family, so many family members. Surely one of them can accommodate you the way you've insisted they could all live in Julia's home." The irony was not lost on anyone in the room. Uncomfortable glances were exchanged among the relatives who had so readily accepted James's invitation to live off his wife's generosity. Julia stepped forward, her voice steady. "I'm leaving now to stay with my father. I'll return next weekend to collect my personal belongings. Please respect my privacy and my property until then." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked toward the door. I followed, with Howard bringing up the rear. As we stepped outside into the sunshine, I heard James's angry voice behind us. "This isn't over. You can't just walk away." But that was exactly what we were doing. Walking away from the toxic environment James had created, and toward the beginning of Julia's healing journey. The first week after leaving James was the hardest for Julia. Despite the clear evidence of abuse and manipulation, she experienced waves of guilt, doubt, and grief for the marriage and life she had believed in. We converted my home office into a comfortable bedroom for her, giving her a private space that was truly her own. "I keep thinking I should have tried harder," she confessed 3 days after the confrontation, sitting in the garden where her mother had once tended roses. "Maybe if I had been more patient with his family." "Julia," I said gently, "their behavior wasn't your responsibility to fix. James showed you who he really was once he believed he had you secured. Nothing you could have done would have changed his true character." The divorce proceedings moved swiftly, facilitated by the substantial evidence of financial abuse. Howard successfully petitioned the court to freeze all joint accounts and order a complete financial accounting. The results were shocking, even to me. James had systematically drained Julia's savings, maxed out credit cards in her name, and even taken loans against her retirement account. The judge's disgust was evident as she ordered full financial restitution and awarded Julia the entire contents of their joint accounts, which James had primarily funded with her own diverted income. "I can't believe how blind I was," Julia lamented when the financial discoveries were revealed. "He always had a reasonable explanation for everything. The joint accounts were about trust. The investment opportunities couldn't wait for discussion. The family needed help temporarily. That's how abusers work," explained Dr. Lewis, the therapist Julia began seeing twice weekly. "They don't start with obvious control. They begin with reasonable requests that gradually normalize increasingly unreasonable demands." While Julia focused on her emotional recovery, I directed my attention to restoring the villa. The property had suffered from months of neglect and misuse. Water damage from ignored leaks, walls scuffed and dented, gardens overgrown, and expensive appliances damaged beyond repair. It was heartbreaking to see what had become of the home I had created with such care. Rather than merely repairing the damage, I decided on a complete renovation. New floors, updated kitchen, redesigned bathrooms, freshly painted walls in different colors. The goal was to transform the space so thoroughly that it would hold no painful memories for Julia if she ever chose to return. James's family departed gradually over the 30-day period, each exit marked by drama and resentment. His parents were the last to leave, requiring a final visit from Howard to enforce the deadline. Throughout this period, Julia maintained her distance, focusing instead on rebuilding her life and professional identity. Her principle: Dr. Martinez, proved an invaluable ally. When James attempted to spread rumors about Julia's mental stability among school board members, Dr. Martinez shut it down immediately with documented evidence of Julia's exemplary teaching record and the court findings of abuse. "Your classroom has been your sanctuary through all this," Dr. Martinez told Julia during a supportive check-in. "Your students never suffered despite your personal troubles. That speaks volumes about your character and professionalism." 4 months after leaving James, Julia made a decision that surprised me but ultimately made perfect sense. "Dad, I don't want to live in the villa again," she said one evening as we shared dinner. "There are too many painful associations, even with the renovations. But I don't want to sell it either." "What do you have in mind?" I asked, curious about her thoughtful expression. "I want to donate it to the school district as a learning center for disadvantaged students," she explained, her eyes brightening with passion I hadn't seen in over a year. "We could convert the main house into classroom spaces and use the grounds for environmental education. The guest house could become administrative offices." The idea was perfect. It transformed a place of pain into one of hope and growth, much as Julia herself was doing with her life. I immediately pledged additional funding to convert the property appropriately and establish an endowment for ongoing operations. 6 months after the donation, the Watson Learning Center opened its doors. Julia continued teaching at her elementary school but served on the center's advisory board, helping develop programs that extended educational opportunities to students throughout the district. As for James, his life took a predictable downward spiral once separated from the resources he had exploited. His financial firm placed him on probation after clients complained about irregular account activities. His family members, no longer benefiting from his marriage, drifted away to find other sources of support. Twice he attempted to contact Julia, once with threats and once with pitiful pleas for reconciliation. Both attempts were handled through legal channels with restraining orders and cease and desist letters. 1 year to the day after leaving James, Julia and I visited the Learning Center to observe a weekend science program in action. Children explored the gardens where James's relatives had once discarded beer bottles. Teachers led lessons in bright rooms where family members had once lounged demanding service. The transformation was complete and healing. "I never thought I'd feel happy here again," Julia admitted as we watched the students. "But seeing all this life and learning, it's like the house finally has the family it deserved." In the center's library, formerly the master bedroom where Julia had spent so many nights crying silently, I noticed her in conversation with the volunteer coordinator, Michael. Their interaction had an ease and mutual respect immediately apparent even from across the room. Later, Julia mentioned casually that they had been having coffee occasionally after Saturday programs. "He's very different from James," she said with cautious optimism. "He listens, really listens. And he seems to genuinely enjoy hearing about my day, my thoughts, my ideas." I smiled, recognizing the careful pace at which my daughter was rebuilding her capacity for trust. There was no rush, no pressure, just the natural healing process of a strong woman reclaiming her identity. As for me, the experience transformed my approach to giving. I realized that true generosity requires wisdom as well as love. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer is not material wealth, but the courage to stand firm when boundaries are violated and values compromised. The villa that I had once seen as my legacy gift to Julia ultimately served its purpose, though not in the way I had envisioned. Instead of housing her marriage, it became the catalyst for her liberation from abuse and eventually a center for community education. The painful journey revealed that sometimes losing what we think we want opens the door to receiving what we truly need. Life offers no guarantees about how our gifts will be received or our love respected, but it does promise that when we stand firmly for what is right, even at great personal cost, we create the foundation for authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than exploitation. The home I built with my hands became something far more valuable, a testament to the power of boundaries, the importance of self-worth, and the truth that love without respect is not love at all. So what about you? Have you ever had to reclaim something valuable from someone who didn't appreciate it? Or perhaps you've been in Julia's position, needing support to break free from a controlling relationship. Share your story in the comments below. And if this account of standing up against family manipulation resonated with you, Please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more real-life experiences, and share this video with someone who might need encouragement to value themselves enough to set healthy boundaries. Thank you for listening, and remember, true family builds you up, never tears you down.